Good morning. Now, what are we going to make of this bizarre period we're living through? First, I'd say, let's be clear, it's not a recession. It's not something that's going to pull everyone down to a certain extent, and there will not be a recovery where most people go back to where they were before. It's something very different. You can call it various things. You could call it a reset, a reconfiguration. I'm going to call it, slightly clunky, it's a discontinuous change event. And what it's going to do is it's going to leave most people, once the dust has settled, either much, much better off than they were before, or much, much worse off. Roughly where we were before the crisis is probably the least likely position that we could end up in. And whether we end up in the better off or the worse off category is going to have quite a lot to do with what we decide to do in this period. So, I'll give you an example. A client of mine, a digital marketing agency, talked to him a month or so ago, and he told me this. All our competitors, he said, and these guys talk to each other all the time, all our competitors have put people on furlough. They've pretty much abandoned any attempt at new business development. We, on the other hand, have added 15 new clients since the start of the lockdown. And it was 15 when we had that conversation a month or two ago. I spoke to him earlier this week. It was 18, or it was 18 at the beginning of the conversation. In the middle of that, he checked his email and it went up to 20. So, it's not difficult to see, projecting forward a year or two, how his position is going to compare with that of his competitors. He took the view there was still business out there were still people out there with problems they wanted solving, and he went looking for them. And his biggest problem is resources. He's got a list of things he'd like to do, but he just doesn't have the time to get onto. Not hard to see how his position will compare with those who spent the crisis hiding in their bunkers. So, this is a weird and confusing period, and I've been helping businesses get through weird and confusing periods since 1991, and the rest of this talk is a distillation of what I've learnt over that period. Now, I can assure you no animals were hurt during the production of this presentation, but quite a few sacred cows were metaphorically slaughtered. So, the question I want to attack is this. What can you do to be sure, or to be as sure as possible, that you're going to be one of those businesses who end up better off, significantly better off, when this thing begins to settle down? And in order to get to that, let me give you a little bit of a framework and look at different ways in which businesses can grow and develop. We use the flip chart. Now, one way, very common, is fairly steady incremental growth. And, well, that's reality for a lot of people. For some people, the curve might actually be flat. Another possibility is scale up. We've reached the point where we've worked out how the business works in a small way, and now we need to multiply everything by 10 as fast as possible. And now, these are the sorts of models that we mostly hear about, because these are the sorts of models that people are mostly familiar with and are comfortable with dealing. And maybe in an ideal world, those would be the only models you needed. But the world is very far from ideal, particularly at the moment, and so we need to consider other models. So, this is the comfortable side of the chart. First model of business development is this. The fog of uncertainty. And that's where an awful lot of people are at the moment. There is no visibility of what's going on or what's likely to happen. And we need to navigate ourselves very carefully through that fog. At some point, we would expect the fog is going to lift and things will become clearer. Nice as it would be to think that we can just move back to this side, to the models we understand, that's not going to be the case. We're going to have to go through some sort of intermediate stage, and this will either be a consolidation where you have to go backwards before you can go forwards again, or it will be a pivot, right angle turn, before we can then progress. And what it's going to look like is we have been thrust unceremoniously from here to here. We then can move to there or to there, then to be able to get back to more familiar territory at some point. So, how do you deal with these different circumstances? Well, if you're dealing with a fog of uncertainty, the best thing you can do is metaphorically throw your hands up and say, okay, let's be honest with ourselves. For now, we simply don't know. But there are things we can do to find out. So try numerous things in a small way. Be experimental. If things that work out very well, you will be able to follow a zigzag path towards your goal. More likely, you're going to walk into a cul-de-sac and have to go backwards before you can then go forwards. In the fog of uncertainty, we should listen to the advice, the very sage advice of the Zen master Shinryu Suzuki, who said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's there are few." Now, we've all become experts in our business and how it works and how to be successful. All of a sudden, the world has completely changed, and we, like an expert chess player, we've trained ourselves only to see the good possibilities or the good moves and choose the best from those. We just become blind to things which don't make sense. We need to recapture that beginner's mind to be able to look at all possibilities, even if some of them are rather peculiar, because the world has so fundamentally changed. So it's a very strange place to be. On the one hand, it's very, very disorienting. On the other hand, it could even be liberating. If you can free yourself from the need to know what works, if you can free yourself from the need to be right, if you can free yourself from the need to have all the answers all the time, then you're in the right mindset to work your way through this fog and come out the other end in a good position, not a bad position. So that is the fog of uncertainty. Supposing we emerge from that and we get to, say, this, the consolidation. I'll talk about this one first because this is a bit easier to deal with. What happens here is we realise that over time we have acquired some parts of the business, maybe customer types, maybe product lines, products, whatever, that no longer work for us. And the route to progress is actually to lose those parts of the business and reinvest all our efforts in the bits that still work. And this is really quite easy to do, and there are simple financial analysis techniques that will help you zero in on what's working and what's not working, or there's an even simpler way to do it, which I'll give you in a moment. Very easy to see what needs to be done. The challenge here is in actually doing it, because it's very hard to let go of what's worked in the past, even if it's not working anymore. And I'm reminded of a a presentation I gave at a co-working space of which I was a member. And the title of the talk was "How to Grow Your Business Without Killing Yourself." And I made various points, but my big point I held until the last. And I didn't state it directly, but I was leading up to it, and people could see where I was going. And I could feel the discomfort in the room growing and growing. And then I came out with it, and I said this. And this is a really simple, powerful technique. I would like you, I said, to imagine, try it now if you like, close your eyes and imagine it's 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. the telephone rings. It's a client or a customer, whatever you call them. Who do you least want it to be? You got that name? Now that is the customer or the client that you must get rid of. Because I'll promise you, I'll guarantee you, if you did the numbers, you'd find out they're costing you money. Plus, they're costing you huge amounts of emotional energy. If you're in a professional practice like mine, or like my wife's psychotherapy practice, one bad client can make you hate your whole practice. And it's really, really valuable to get rid of it. But it's really hard. And so I said to them, when you leave this room, I want you to do this before you do anything else. Get on the phone to that customer or client you've just identified, and you tell them one of two things. Either you just tell them you're fired, or if you want to be slightly more gentle, you can say, look, really sorry about this, but we've just had a new finance director come in, and he's a really mean bastard, and he's pointed out it's actually costing us money to serve you. So he's told us that really it's either it's 100% price increase effective immediately, or we can no longer work with you and see what happens. And this is ever so hard to do. People cling on to what's used to work, or they cling on to what they've got, which prevents them getting something better. I can remember a surreal conversation I had over dinner with a woman who ran a PR firm. I thought, bloody hell, you know, somebody's put something in her wine or my wine here, because what I was hearing, she was simultaneously pitching new business to a client and getting ready to sue that client for non-payment of invoices for previous work. And how can you possibly work with someone like that? It's really, really hard. But for this audience in the co-working space, I'd underestimated them, because I let them go and didn't expect anything much to happen. But 6 months later, I was back there for another event, and standing around chatting late at the end, somebody came up to me and said, you know, Alastair, I remember that talk you gave. I did what you said. I fired a client, and he was really good. And the guy talked next to him said, yeah, I fired two, and that was really good as well. Made a huge difference to me. And then the woman who ran the space had overheard, and she said, oh, that's nothing. We had 300 members when Alastair gave that talk, and we fired 200 of them. Wow. Yes, she said, it was a turning point, because it completely changed the nature of this space. It went from being, you know, anybody's welcome so long as they can pay the monthly fee, to a community of people with common interests who would collaborate in various different ways. And that is what you can achieve if you're willing to step back from what you've been doing in the past, if you can recognise that it's not working any longer. Quite easy to see, much more difficult to take action on, but sometimes you've really got to do it, and when you do, the benefits are huge. So let's move on to the next form of change, the pivot. Now, this is slightly more difficult. I can give you a step-by-step, join the dots, painting by numbers approach to doing the consolidation, to working out what's not working. The pivot is a creative act, but I can give you some techniques, tricks, hacks, call them what you will, which will help you come up with interesting directions to pivot. Now, the most powerful of these is the concept that there are no new things. There are only new combinations of existing things. And I'll start with an example of this from the art world, and then I'll give you an example of how it was applied to a business I was working with. So, most of you will be familiar with the artist Roy Lichtenstein and his work. I'll give you a quick example. Thanks. So Lichtenstein built his entire career on a combination of two things which had been around for a long time: comic book images and the dots, the Bend-A dots they're called, the dots that make up any colour image in a printed document. And he was enormously successful. That particular work, we don't know how much it would fetch if it ever came up for sale. It probably never will come up for sale because it's in Tate Modern. But there are 24,000 authorised prints of that artwork out in the world, and the last one I could track down was for $19,000. That's $19,000 for one of 24,000 copies of an artwork. That's pretty powerful from a combination of two pre-existing things. So, what can you do with this concept in business? Well, I'll give the example of a client of mine, a digital marketing agency, and they'd started out writing content for their clients to put on Facebook, managing Google pay-per-click campaigns, and they got pretty good at it, but they realised it was an overcrowded, commoditised space, and they needed to do something different. So, we identified a couple of avenues. One of the things they did was they realised they were doing something for their clients, monitoring what was going on in their world, and they were doing this for free, but it had a lot of value. And so we were able to take something they were doing anyway for free and turn it into a £10,000 monthly retainer product. And we did that by prettying it up, making it look more sophisticated, more sexy, and the way we achieved that was by putting on top of it a concept from 1970s military strategy. Two combinations of existing things. Takes this product from nothing to £10,000 a month indefinitely, £120,000 a year. There was another product they had, which was a strategic analysis, which could actually identify entire new virgin markets, things that customers were talking about that you and your competitors were ignoring, and that was being sold for £3,000 to £5,000. That is now selling for £46,000, and again we were able to reorganise it and rebrand it. This time the idea was, we thought, well, McKinsey have got their 5 Ps of marketing, price, position, whatever. Can we do something a bit similar with this? And we looked at it and we realised, in fact, that this process they were using it fitted quite neatly into the 7 Cs. So there's customer, channel, and various other things. Again, taking an idea from elite strategy consulting, and what we effectively managed to do with these things and others was to take a pretty run-of-the-mill service business and turn it into a very high-valued and very highly valued strategic marketing consultancy. Again, just by bringing together different combinations of things which had been around for a long time. In fact, that's what McKinsey did in their day. McKinsey became an elite strategy consultancy by taking the ethos of a high-class law firm and applying it to what McKinsey at the time was a fairly scrappy, slightly disreputable bunch of time and motion experts. Combinations of existing things. Where can you find them? So, sum up. You're here or you're here. All of a sudden you're in the fog of uncertainty. And another piece of advice for the fog of uncertainty is this. The co-working space I mentioned, I was one of the first members when they set it up in 2009, when co-working spaces was something quite new. As the thing was coming to an end, they had to close last year. I remember talking to the woman who ran it, and she said she remembered some advice that I'd given her right at the beginning. I said, when you're trying to do a new business in a new space, apparently what I said was, it's all bullshit, so you may as well do what you want, which means follow your intuition. And if you give yourself permission to follow your intuition through here, then you've got a much better chance of ending up here and here. So, sum up. This doesn't apply now. You may be here, you're heading for here. And the possibilities here are enormous. There's no shortage of people with new problems, existing problems that have become bigger that you can solve. And there's never been a better time to talk to people about new approaches, because what they've been doing is broken. And if it's not broken, they can't afford it anymore. So a better approach will fall on more fertile ground now than has been the case for a very, very long time. So I hope that's been useful. I wish you all the best in your endeavours.